So in this video, you're gonna learn how to build and deploy a chat application by using Python and a little bit of JavaScript. This is gonna be a group chat application, and when someone sends a message, everyone will be notified in real time. And also when someone joins, leaves, or updates their name, everyone will be notified. In this tutorial, you're gonna learn how to initialize Scikit.io to build real-time applications. You'll also learn the best practices in Python, such as creating a virtual environment. And most importantly, at the end of this tutorial, you're gonna learn how to deploy your applications for free so that you can share it with anybody and everybody. This is a beginner-friendly course, and the source code will be free in the description. So if you're ready, let's get into it. Okay, so before we start writing any code, you might be asking, what are the prerequisites to be able to follow along with this tutorial? So the first thing you need is to install Python on your machine, and then you would know the basics, such as how to create variables, how to write if-else statements, and how to create functions. That's it for the Python section, and some optional prerequisites would be how to write HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So we'll be using HTML for the markup, CSS for styling, and JavaScript for some interactivity on the browser. But if you have never worked with any of them, that's fine. We'll just see this in action, and I'll actually try to walk you through it. So before we try to write any code, let's just see the application overview so that we know what we're gonna have at the end of the day. So we will need basically two different files, one for our backend logic, which is gonna be our Python file, and one for the UI, right, which is gonna be our template index.html file. And inside this, we'll have some styling with CSS and some interactivity with JavaScript. And in the backend, we will need two different packages, which is gonna be Scikit.io for real-time communication, and then the Flask framework so that we can really render our UI. I know this might look pretty complicated, but it is actually pretty simple, and we'll see this in action. And then here in the UI, we'll also be using Scikit.io so that we can send events and communicate with the backend. But as I said, don't worry, this is not really complicated. We'll just see this in action. So with that in mind, the very first thing I have done is to create an empty folder on my desktop, and I just call it as Python chat app. You can really call this anything, and just open it up in VS Code. Now we'd like to create a terminal, right? And here we'd like to create what we call the virtual environment. So in Python development, whenever you create a new project, you basically most of the time create a virtual environment so that you have all the packages and dependencies put into that environment and not in your machine, right? So let's say this is your machine, right? This is your laptop or your PC, whatever that is. And whenever you want to create a new project, you basically create a new virtual environment, right? And let's see how we can create one. So it's gonna be a little bit different both in Python, both in macOS, Linux, and Windows. So if you're on Windows, just like me, go ahead and say python-m venv. But if you're on Linux or macOS, you would say python 3. And if you just go ahead and run this, this is gonna create a folder which is gonna be your virtual environment, right? Now, what does that mean? So here we say, like by using the Python, we say run a module as a script with this flag. This is not really too much important, but here we're using the venv module to be able to create an environment, and this is the name of the folder that we would like to create. So if you go ahead and delete this and say venv3 or really anything, and this is going to be the folder name that it creates. The first one is the module, and then the name of that virtual environment. Okay, so let's just go ahead and delete this and have it as venv. This is the convention that we use most of the time. And let's just say don't show this again. Okay, now what do we want to do next is to create our files. Let's say app.py, and we'd like to create the index.html under our templates. Let's say index.html, and let's scaffold this just by doing that, and let's say h1 here. This says Python chat app, and we can even put this as our title, right? And let's capitalize these words. Okay, now that we have created our environment, we'd like to activate it and install our packages. So if you are on Windows, you would say vmv, right? Just go into that folder, go under the scripts, right? And then activate, run this file. Let's say activate and run it. Now here we can see this has been activated. If you get this green color, it means it is activated. Let's deactivate it. This is how we can do it. And if you're on macOS or Linux, you would say source vmv /bin and activate. Okay, and that would be activating it as well. Since we are on Windows, this is what we're gonna write. And now let's try to build this app.py so that we can render our index.html file. But as I said, to be able to make that work, we need this Flask package, right? So let's go ahead and install them. We will say pip install, and pip is the package manager for Python. When you install it, it by default comes with it. But if you don't have it, and this is how you can check if you have it or not, you would say pip -- version. And if you can get this kind of output with the version, that means it is installed. But if you don't have it, you should install it as well, which is pretty simple. Now I'll say pip install Flask and Flask _ scikit-io. So this is gonna go ahead and install those packages and put it in our virtual environment. Let's just wait for this to complete. Okay, there we go. It has been installed. Now we would like to build our Python file so that we can render this in the first place. Let's go ahead and grab our imports. So I'll say from Flask, we would like to import the Flask render template as well as the request, and we'll be using all of them. Let's say also from Flask _ scikit-io package, we'll like to get the scikit-io as well as the emit. Now we'll also be using the random package, which is coming from Python by default. Let's say we'd like to create a Flask app. This is how we can do it, and we can create a scikit-io instance with this. And now we'll just say if a user visits this home route, we'd like to return, and you should have this indentation. First we need to get the index function, right? Okay, so let's just say when someone visits this route, we'd like to run this function. We're just gonna go ahead and return, and let's indent this, render template of index.html. And so what this says, delete this, bring this back. I think this shouldn't be indented, right? If you just do it, here this says you don't need this indentation for this decorator. Okay. Now we also want to say if the _ name is equal to, and just make sure you have 2 underscores. If it is equal to main, and again 2 underscores, we would like to run this Flask application, right? So we'll say scikit-io run and put the Flask app into it. So this is how we can initialize Scikit and Flask in our application. Now let's try to run this file. We'll say python app.py, and again, like one last time, if you're on macOS or Linux, you would say Python 3. Okay, let's run this. Here it says development server started at this port. Let's click it. Here we can see we can get the output that says Python chat app, which is coming from our template, right? Okay, now we would like to first handle the entire backend logic, which is going to be with the scikit-io mostly. Then we're going to go ahead, build the UI, and finally deploy this application. Now, if you have never worked with scikit-io, let's just see some diagrams so that we can really understand it. Okay, so let's say we have a bunch of different users, and we want to have some kind of communication that is working in real time. So we will have our server that is utilizing scikit-io, and this is event based. What that means is that you can send events to the server saying like, I just connected, and server will get this event and maybe just broadcast it to everyone. here it's gonna say, hey, this user just connected, and this is gonna be in real time. These users do not have to send any requests, so they're not gonna say, hey, could you just tell me who is connected? So they don't need to send that request. Whenever an event is coming, it is just gonna immediately just inform all the clients that are connected. Okay, now let's just say this user disconnected. Here it's gonna say, hey everyone, this user just disconnected. And since you are building a group chat, right, everyone can just communicate in real time. Here this user can say, hey, I just want to send a message, and this is gonna say, hey, there is a new message from this user to every one of you guys. And I think now you get the point. And we'll have a bunch of different event types, right, for the connection, disconnection, sending messages, and updating usernames. Now let's just see some kind of like example, right? So here this user says, I am just connecting. This is going to be the event name. Let's say, hey, I just connected, and this is going to send user joined to every user, right? So there's always a man in the middle, right? This user doesn't immediately says, hey guys, I just connected. Instead, it just lets the server know, so that server will navigate it to everyone efficiently. And here again, a different example. Here this says, I am just sending a new message, and it would send the message content. Here it says, hello guys, and this is gonna say, hey guys, you have a new message, and this is the message content. So I hope this makes sense. That was a long explanation, but let's just see the UI as well. When someone joins, we're gonna get this system message. Here it says, this user just joined the chat, and we can see the messages, someone left the chat, and we can even update our username. And it's gonna says like, it's gonna say, hey, this user just updated their name to this new name. Okay, so with that in mind, let's just try to build all these events and just make that work. So above the first route, we'd like to create the Scikit.io event. And here we'll just say Scikit.io.on connect. Now, whenever you see this .on, you should just know that we are listening for something, right? So we are listening for, let's say, for the connect event, okay? Okay, when someone connects, we would like to handle this. So we'll just go ahead and just say def handle connect. You can call this function anything. And here, the very first thing we would like to do is just generate a random username. So I'll just say username is going to be equal to f string, and we will say user underscore random package dot rand int and the range. So it could be from 1000 to 9999, right? And now we'd like to also create a random gender, okay? I'll say gender is going to be random dot choice from an array. This could be either a girl or boy, and obviously this should be a string. Okay, now you might be asking, why don't we use male and female? Now it's because we'll be using an API that specifically wants you to use a girl or boy. Okay, I'll just even put this if you want to test this out, but let me just copy this and show this. Okay, so if you go with the boy in the URL, this is going to give you a boy profile image, but if you go with the girl, this is going to give you a girl profile image, obviously, right? And depending on this randomly generated gender, we'll get a like an avatar URL, right? And we also want to store all the connected users into a Python dictionary. So let's say users, and here we can put a comment above. We'll say Python dictionary, this is, and store connected users. Key is gonna be the Scikit.io, okay, Scikit ID, I was going to say. Key is Scikit ID, and then the value is gonna be the username and avatar URL. And we'll just see this in action. Okay, now that we have the username and gender, let's try to create an avatar URL as well. I'll say avatar underscore URL, which is going to be equal to, again, this f string, and we can put the entire URL as it is, right? And the only dynamic part is going to be this gender field. So let's say gender, just like this, and then the username. Okay, so with that, now we have the avatar URL as well. Now what do we want to do is just store this user info into this users dictionary. So here we'll say users request.set, which stands for the scikit ID, and this request is coming from the Flask, if you remember, right? And here we'll just basically say this is going to be a dictionary or an object. We'll say username field is going to be equal to this username variable that we created, and then the avatar is going to be equal to the avatar URL field that we just created, right? And now that this user is connected, we would like to notify all the clients about this new user, and this is where we're going to use the emit function, right? So we have stored it in the database or in the server. We would like to now notify everyone with this new connection. We'll just say user joined, right? You can call this anything, like user connected it could be, but this is the name that I'll be going with. I'll just say username, and you'll basically just giving the username as well as the avatar URL of this user. And here we'll just say broadcast is going to be true, so that it lets everyone about this event, right? Just like what we have done here. It's going to go ahead and just tell to everyone this user just connected. Okay, the very last thing we would like to do is just give a random name for this user, right? So we have created the username, but we also need to just notify that user about the username. So we'll say emit is going to be set underscore username. We can just say here is your username. Okay, so I hope this makes sense. This is the entire function where we handle the connection, and same is going to be for the disconnection, right? We will just delete it from the from our store, and then just let everyone this user just left. Okay, let's go ahead and try to do it, or even you can pause the video and just have it as a challenge. So I'll say at scikit.io.on disconnect. So this is the special name that we get from scikit.io. We'll say dev handle disconnect method, and we'll like to basically delete it from the dictionary. So you can do it, I think, like this, but what I'll be doing is to store it in a variable. Let's say users.pop, right? We'll just delete it, and this is the ID of that, and in case it is undefined, we'll just return none, so that we don't really have any errors and our code doesn't crash. We'll say if we have the user, we would like to emit this user left event, and we would like to give the username. Here I'll just say user name, which is going to be this user's username, right? And we would like to broadcast this so that everyone knows about this, right? Now let's save. I think this is a bit too much indentation. Okay, it should be like this. So this is how we handled the connection and disconnection. Now we have two different things left, which is going to be able to send the message and update the username. So we'll just say scikit.io.on. We will listen for any incoming new messages, right? Then we would like to render this or handle this with the function. Let's say handle message, which is going to take the message itself, so we can call it as the data. And here we would like to first find the user. So users.get, and we'll say request.scikit.id, and we'll say if we have the user, then we would like to just emit an event to everyone. We'll say new message, and we're going to give the basically profile image of that user, right? When there is a new message coming, we'll get the profile like avatar URL, the username, as well as the message content. Okay, let's just do it. we'll go into the second argument, which is going to be the data body. So we'll say username, get the avatar, and we also want to get the message content, which is going to be data. We can just have the message out of it. And finally, we'll just say broadcast to be equal to true. And that's going to be it for the send message event as well. The other one is going to be to be able to update the username. So the first thing we would like to do, again, just listen to it, scikit.io.on, and the event name is going to be update underscore username, right? And we'll just handle this. Let's say def handle update username, and we're going to get the data, which is going to basically have the new username. So let's say old underscore username. We can just grab this from the user's dictionary. We'll say request dot set, which is going to be the scikit ID, and from this user we'll like to get the username, and let's get the new username, which is basically the data that user sends us. From this we'll like to get the username, and we'll like to update this old name to be the new username. So here we'll just say from the users request.set, we just find this current user, and we would like to update their username to be this new username. And let's notify all clients about the username change. So we'll just go ahead, let's say emit, and the event name could be username underscore updated. And let's close this off, put our second object, which is going to be the data that we're going to grab from the client. So let's say old underscore username is going to be equal to the old username, and same for the new one. Now let's just broadcast this to everyone. Okay, so basically that's it for the entire app.py file. Let's quickly try to reiterate what we have done. We have installed our packages, right? We just got our imports, and we have created a Flask app where we can use it to be able to render our template. And we got the scikit.io instance with the users dictionary so that we can keep track of the connected users, where the key is going to be the scikit ID and the value is going to be the username and avatar URL, right? Okay, so we are listening for the connect event. How do we understand this? Like if we are listening or not? It is because we have the on method, right? So scikit.io on listen for the connection, disconnection, send message, and update username. So all these events will be coming from the user. So if you take a look at the diagram, it is actually pretty self-explanatory, right? User sends you this event and you're listening for the event itself. When there is a new connection, what you do basically generate all these information randomly, then store it on the backend so that you know like which user is online, which is not, and you say like, hey everyone, I'm just notifying you with this broadcast is equal to true, and this user just joined, and we say, hey, this is your random username, and if you really want to, you can update it, and so on and so forth. For the disconnection, we just let everyone that this user is disconnected, and sending new messages as well as updating the username. So that's gonna be it for this file. Next, we're gonna build our UI. So let's go ahead and save this file, and I will see you in the next section. Okay, so welcome back to this section. The very first thing we would like to do is just build the UI, right? So we would like to build some HTML and CSS so that we can get this output. So let's go ahead and first create a div, which is gonna be our chat container. So we're gonna give this class so that we can really select this later and give it some styles. And then we would like to have our chat header, right? Which is gonna be this thing that you see, which has some border radiuses, which stands for really rounded corners, and some different background colors, things like that. And we're gonna have our username container, which is going to hold the username, the input to be able to update it, and then a button. So let's create all of them. So we put an ID so that we can really select it with the JavaScript, right? You can also put the class, but here I'm going with the ID. Then we have an input with the type being text, ID being user input, and then the placeholder, here it says new username. And let's go ahead and get a button that says update username. And then we just got a button that says update your username. Then below to it, we would like to have the chat messages container. So basically this will contain all the messages and these system messages that we have, right? And below to this, we would like to have the chat input with an input as well as a button. So here it is going to be this section. So that's kind of it for the markup, right? This is going to be our HTML. Now what do we want to do is just add some styling, which is going to be under the head tag. So go above this title, we would like to create a styles, or maybe just style element, right? Style tag. And since this is not a CSS course, basically I will copy it and paste it. You can do the exact same thing. Just go into the GitHub repo that you can find from the description of this video and find this index.html file. Grab the styling, which is about 150 lines of code, and you can really just see what we are doing here. I'll just zoom out so that you can see it clearly. We are defining our colors. So if you just change this to be like these colors to be green, pink, yellow, the entire view is going to change, right? The theme is going to change. And here we have setting some font family here, margin, paddings, background colors, or even just colors, giving some border radiuses, box shadows, things like that. Here you can see like we are selecting all of them with the class names and even sometimes with IDs. Okay, so these are going to be for the styling. As I said, this is not the focus of this tutorial, so I will skip to explaining this. And the other thing we would like to do is import the Scikit.io into this UI, right? What do we want to do is just go into cdn.js and just say Scikit.io. Here we can go ahead and grab the script. So here I'll just say copy the script tag and paste it below the title. Okay, so this will allow us to use Scikit.io in the JavaScript script that we're gonna have. So just above the body, go ahead and create a script tag, and we'll be able to put our JavaScript code into here. So the first thing we would like to do is just get the socket, and here we can how we can get this, right? Let me just zoom in. Just get our socket instance so that we can really send events to our backend, right? And here I'd like to just grab a couple of different elements. So here we would like to get the chat messages. We say document get element by ID chat messages. This is the ID we have given to it. Then we would like to get the message input. We would like to get the send button, current username, user input, and we would like to get the update username button. And we'll be calling all of them just in a second in the video. Now let's say we would like to get the current username. Let's say this is going to be a variable, and by default this is going to be an empty string because we can we'll be updating this basically. And what we can do is just listen for new events as well. So here again we'll be using scikit.on, just like in the Python file. Whenever you're listening for something, you'll be using this method. So here we say listen for the set username event, and we're gonna get a data back, right? So let's just wrap this into our function. This is gonna be our argument. Now what is gonna be this data? Well, basically whatever you return from here, it is this object, right? Here you have the username. So that's why we can say something like data.username, which is going to be equal to our current username variable. So that's how we can really get the data out of the event, right, from the socket. And now that we got the current username, we can update our like current username span, which is going to be this thing. Whenever you update your, let me just change the color. Okay, so let's say you put your username. Once you click to it, it's gonna go ahead and update this span. Let's say current username span the text content is going to be equal to, let's say, your username and the dynamic value. So current username. Okay, so this is going to be our first event that we are listening to. Then the other one is going to be whenever someone joins, right? Let's say socket.on, and we can shrink the left hand side. We'll say user underscore joined. In this case, again, we're going to get some data back, and we would like to say add new message. I'll just say add message, and we would like to say the name of the username, right, who has joined. So I'll put the backticks, and I will say data.username joined the chat. And this message is coming from the system, right? This is a system message. And this is the method that we're going to create just in a second. And it's going to give this kind of an output, right? Here it'll say username joined the chat. This is what we are building. Let's do the same thing for the left chat. I will duplicate this. Here we'll say if the event is user left, we can just change the text. We'll just say this user left the chat. And again, this is a message coming from the system. So if it is system, we're going to see this kind of message. But if it is user, we will see this kind of a message element. Okay, so the other event, let's just listen for the new message. I think we can again duplicate this. Give a little bit space. We will say if the event name is equal to new message, we're going to get the data, which is the new message data, right? And here we would like to just send, let's just say the message itself. We'll say data.message. This is a user message, right? It is not a system message. And the username, let's say data.username, as well as the avatar, so that we can show the avatar of the user as well as the username. And if you are wondering how can we grab those, well, basically this is what we are returning: the username, avatar, and then the message, which is our data object. Okay, I hope this makes sense at this point. Now I think very last one that we're going to be listening to is going to be the username updated. So I will just go ahead, maybe type this out, or maybe let's just duplicate it and we can update it on top of it. So socket.on, let's say username underscore updated. We're going to get some data back, obviously, and you can like wrap this with parentheses, or you can just don't wrap it because it is only one argument. That's completely fine. Here how we can just leave it like this. And again, we will add a message to the user interface where it's going to say something like this user changed their name to this new username, right? So we'll say if, and first let's just update this, by the way. I'll just make this to be backtick, and I will say data.old username changed their name to this new username. And let's say data.new underscore username, and this is a system message so that we can really see it in this tiny gray text. And now here there's an edge case that we need to keep track of. So if we are changing our name, so I'll just say data.old username, if it is equal to the current username, then that means we are just updating our name, so that we need to update the UI as well depending on this. So we will say current username is going to be equal to, let's say, data.new username, and we would like to update the span with it. Let's say current username span dot text content is going to be equal to your username and then whatever the new username is, right? So this is going to happen when user types their name in here and click to this button. It will update this with the new name. And I think I have explained it wrong in the previously, where here I said this is going to be the case when we got this event, but this is not really whenever you join into the application, this is going to run. Okay, so when you click to the update username button, this will actually run, and when you just join to the application, this will run automatically and update the span. I hope this makes sense in this case, because if you remember, this is going to be called whenever you join, right? In the connection event, whenever you connect, it's going to create a username by default and just set it to your username. Okay, so these are going to be all the events that we're going to be listening to, and whenever we got those events, we would like to update the UI and even maybe update some different parts of the UI as well. So now we have listened for multiple different events from the client. Now it is time to send some events to our backend, right? So let's try to do it. Basically, I will just go ahead, create a function that is going to be called as send message. And for now, let's just leave it empty. And then we'll have one more function that says add message, which is something that we have created already, right? And let's just try to see how we can send a message, right? We will say if send button, let's just first add an event listener to it. Let's say if we got a click event, we would like to call the send message function. Okay, and whenever we type something into the message input, so here I'll just say message input dot add event listener, where it is key press or key down, we would like to run this function. We're gonna get the event, and here we'll just go ahead say if e dot key is equal to the enter key, we would like to basically call the send message function. Okay, and when we say update the username, so let's say update username button, add event listener, when we click to it, we would like to run this function. Let's just say this is going to be update username, and let's create that function as well. Okay, so let's just save and we will build these functions. So let's first build the send message function. What we want to do is first get the message. Here we'll say message input dot value dot wait, why didn't we get the value? Like I think we should get the auto suggestion, but let's just go with it. We'll say call the trim method. So we got the message that user typed in. We'll say if there is a new message, we would like to say socket.emit, where we send an event, which is going to be called as send message, and we will send the message to the backend. And now that we have sent the message, let's clear the input to be an empty string. And let's do the same thing for the update username. We'll just go into it. Let's scroll a little bit. I will say first, let's get the new username from the input. So username input value.trim, and we'll say if there is a new username, and we can just say if new username is not equal to the current username. In this case, we would like to emit this event called update underscore username, and we can put the username to be new username, right? And we'll say username input dot value is going to be an empty string, so that we can really just reset the state in the UI. Okay, so the very last function we will need is to update the UI. So this is going to be a little bit longer function because we would like to create HTML elements and put it in the UI, so to say, like put it in the UI dynamically, right? So this is going to be taking a couple of different arguments. First one is going to be the message, then the type, if it is system or user, and we'll get the username, as well as the avatar. Now this could be an empty string if it is not being passed, right? And same for the avatar, because if the system is sending the message, they are not going to have an avatar or username, right? So system sent the message, they don't have an avatar or username. They just have the message. Okay, so let's try to create this function. First, we would like to create a message element, which is going to be a div. So we say create an element that is div. And we would like to add the class name to be message so that we can really have it looking a little bit clean. And we need to keep track of the type. So we'll say if type is equal to user, and do we ever send the user in the add message function? Let's just check for it. So here, this is type of system, this is user. Okay, so we'll just say if it is type is equal to user, run this. And if it is not, then this is the system case. Let's first handle the type being user. Now we'll just check if we are sending the message. So we'll just say if send message, and we can say if the username is equal to the current username, that means we sent the message. So we can add a class name to our message element, which is going to be sent. So if you have the sent class, it is going to be on the right hand side, and if you don't have it's going to be on the left hand side. And you can take a look at this class by going to the styles. Let's just search for .sent. Okay, here you can see if we got the sent class, the flex direction is going to be row reverse, which means it would be on the right hand side, right? Okay, I hope this makes sense. Let's go ahead into here, into the if check. We would like to now create an avatar image, right? So here, let's say create an element, which is going to be an image. Let's give a little bit space, and we would like to give the source to it, which is going to be the avatar, right? Then we would like to append this as a child to our message element. Then we would like to create the message content, right? Now we'll say content dev. Again, we're creating a div with a class name being message content. Then we would like to create the username div. Okay, so we're going to give the class name of being message username, and then the username content is going to be into it. Then content div will be updated with this username div. Then let's create the message text. So here I'm just copying and pasting. I hope you don't mind it, because I'll just walk you through it line by line, right? We don't need to waste any time by typing all this. And we'll again update the text content with the new message, and let's just say append child. And finally, into this message element, we will append everything that we have created, which is going to be the content div. And finally, in the else case, we will say the class name is going to be system message, so that it is looking like this. We have the styling for it, and just put the text content. Okay, after this if and else, we will go ahead, say chat messages append child to this message element that we have created. So that is going to update the UI. And once you send the message, you want this to scroll to the bottom, right? So let's say you have a bunch of different messages. Whenever you send new one, it should automatically scroll for you. And we can do it by writing a single line of code. Chat messages dot scroll top is going to be equal to chat messages dot scroll height. So that's going to be it for the entire file, and let's just try to test this out. Let's go ahead, kill this, and run this once again, which is going to be our app.py file. Click to it, and here we can see, let's just delete this h1. I think we forgot. Just go above, delete this, save, refresh. Okay, we need to kill the server and run this again. Let's refresh, and here we can see this is what we got. Since we just joined, here it says this user joined the chat, and you can see our username span is being updated, right? I'll go ahead, copy this, save it into a different tab, and this is the username 7622, and this user can also see that user just joined the chat. And let me just put them side by side so that we can see it in real time. Okay, so here I'll just say hey And since this message is sent from me, I can see it on the right hand side, and this user can see it on the left hand side. So let's say, hi, how is it going? Like here you can see it is scrolling for us by default, right? And this is what we have done with that single line of code at the end. It is this one. Okay, now let's try to update our username. Here I'll just go ahead, say my username is gonna be John Doe and update it. Here we can see everyone is just being notified, right? And let's just send a new message. It should have our new name in both cases, and we can do the same thing really. Let's just say Bob Doe. Hey, it just works as expected, and this can work even if you create multiple different tabs, right? Everyone can just see those messages. So that's gonna be it for the application. In the next section, we would like to deploy this. I'll see you in the next one. And I think I just forgot, but once you leave it, you're gonna get the left the chat message as well. So it is working, no worries. Okay, so now that we have built our application, we would like to deploy this for free, right? And for this, we're gonna be using a platform called render.com. Go ahead and create an account, then you'll be in the maybe dashboard. So if you click it, you'll be able to go ahead and see your past projects. So this is the demo application that I have deployed, but just ignore this. Probably you're not gonna have anything here. We'll just go ahead and create a new web service, but more on this later in the video. First, let's take a look at the terminal. So when we run the app.py file, so if we just go very above, we can see here it says this is a development server. Do not use it in a production deployment. Use a production VSGI server instead. So what does that mean? So that means basically you need a VSGI.py for the deployment, to make the deployment happen really. And in this file, we would like to just run our app.py file. So we'll go ahead and just from, let's say, from app, import app and scikit.io. Okay, so since we have these variables, we can go ahead, grab it from the app.py and just their names. And we'll just run this file basically. So we'll say if name, and just make sure you put double underscores. If it is equal to main, in this case, we would like to initialize scikit.io and run our application. And since this is in the production, we don't really need to get this debugging logs, right? When you put debug to be equal to true, you get all these, but if you don't put, you're not going to get anything, which is fine for the production. Okay, so this is the first file that we would need. And we also need, I think, two different like packages. Let's go ahead, kill this with Control C, and we will say pip install G unicorn, which stands for green unicorn, and we're gonna see what that means. And we also want to get the event let. Let's install these packages. And here I can maybe put a comment so that you can really see it in the source code. So green unicorn and VSGI, which stands for web server gateway interface, are both components used to deploy your Python web applications, and specifically in Flask or Django applications. And since we're using Flask, we're using them, right? So this is going to be needed in the render.com when we try to deploy it. So the other thing we need is to get the requirements file. So let's see how it's going to look like. First, I'll just say CLS to clear up my console, and I will say pip freeze, and I'll say like greater than requirements.txt. I think I have a typo here. Let's say requirements. Okay, so I just had a typo, I fixed it, and if you are on macOS or Linux, this is gonna be pip3, right? But I'm on Windows, that's what I'll be doing. So once you run this, it's gonna create the requirements file, and it's gonna show you which packages you're using in this project. And we're gonna need this when we deploy it, because the render needs to install all these packages to be able to run this virtual environment, right? So that it can run the application. So I think with this, that's gonna be it. We can deactivate it now. And we're gonna go ahead, create a git ignore file so that we don't really push our virtual environment files into the GitHub, which is not really needed. So I'll just copy this and paste it. You can get it from the GitHub repo from this file, where we just ignore the virtual environment, ID files, environment variables, things like that. Okay. Once you save this, we're gonna go ahead, just say git init, and let's say git commit -m initial commit. Okay, obviously we first need to add all of them, right? Git add all, and let me just grab this so that you can see it. Okay, git commit -m. Now we can say initial commit. Okay, now we'd like to deploy this to the GitHub. So I'll go ahead and create a GitHub repo. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and give it a name. Let's say Python chat. I will make this private, but while you're watching this video, it's going to be public. For now, I'll just go with private, and if you are following along, you can go with the public option. Okay, let's say create the repo. We're going to go ahead, grab this thing, and just paste it into our terminal so that it's going to go ahead, push this code to the GitHub. Okay, now that we got our files, right, it is working as expected, we can go into the render dashboard. I'll say create new web service, and we will pull this GitHub repo, right, which is this one that I have just created. Python chat, let's say connect, and we need to have the build command as well as the start command. Now, basically, it's gonna first run this command. Let me just zoom in. It will say, hey, just take a look at the requirements.txt file and install all these packages into the render server, right? So that it can run our application. So it would go ahead, install the scikit.io, Flask, Green Unicorn, Greenlet, like all these packages that we need. And then for the start command, we need to run a command so that we can run this that is compatible with the scikit.io. So instead of leaving this as default, we will say Green Unicorn, just put one space, -- worker class, and we'll say event let. So this is why we installed that package, -w1 vsgi and app. So we call this as vsgi. It's because this is what we call the file name, right? Now we're going to go ahead, select the free plan, which is completely fine for the side projects. It just goes inactive when you don't really visit it more than 15 minutes. And when you visit that, it's going to take about maybe 30 seconds to 1 minute. Then it's going to connect to it. Okay, let's just say deploy this web service. Hopefully it should be live without any issues. So this is going to take a little bit of time. We got a URL, right? So once this is live, I'll just be right back. So here I just got a new notification. Here it says in progress, successfully installed all these packages by taking a look at the requirements file, and build was successful. Hopefully it should be live just in a second, but this takes a little bit of time. So let's just wait for this. And there we go. It just says live, your service is live. Let's click to it and just visit it. Okay, I'll just copy this, and here we can see, here it says you just joined to the chat, right? Let me just copy this, paste it, and just put them side by side. So here it says like this user joined the chat. Let me just put them side by side, and let's just test this out. I'll just say, hey, here we can see it is just working as we had in the development server, right? And if we leave it, it's just gonna say this user left the chat. We can update our name, let's say John Doe. It's going to notify everyone, and we can even have multiple different sessions. So let me just create more than one, right? So this is the second one. Let's open up another tab, paste it, and I'll just put all of them side by side. So here, let's say, hey everyone, sent the message, and it is just live in every single tab, right? And if we just leave this, it's gonna say this user just left the chat, and it is working in real time. So with that, that's gonna be it for this entire application. I hope you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one.